Hello world of YouTube and welcome to Woo-Brewery the sequel. Last year, throughout February, I made a bunch of videos paying tribute to one of my favorite groups in hip-hop, the Wu-Tang Clan, and I still had a bevy of ideas that I put on the back burner when coming up for things to talk about that were Wu-Tang related that I didn't want to let go of. So I decided to do a sequel that feels a little more timely this year anyway. The Hulu show, The American Saga's last season, is airing this month as well. So why not do a little algorithm fun and talk about the Wu-Tang Clan for a handful of videos this month. Not just music-related stuff. We'll do a little movie and a little video game-related discussion as well. But, obviously, they got a lot of music, and they've got a lot of interesting points to talk about. And I figured while I ended last month's with where the group started by talking about 36 Chambers, I would start this year's celebration of the group by talking about where they left us musically in a everyone agrees this is a group outing album that isn't technically, but is technically the last thing they've dropped. It is indicative of where the group was at the time, drama and all, and it was an album that, while was meant to celebrate the group, ultimately showcased the scattershot place that it really had grown to in its 20 years since its inception. I'm talking about a record that I thought was alright at the time, and I still go back to every now and again, at least some parts of, and also gives me an excuse to talk about an album that technically would be the last thing they've given us as a group collective release, even if it's not something you can really indulge in. I'm talking about the albums A Better Tomorrow and Once Upon a Time in Shaolin.
My knowledge 120, proof of 10, a roof all. Let's spray, M-A-S-T-A. King, I love, club packs.
Now, A Better Tomorrow is a lot of things. Like I said up at the top, it is a reflection of the group's 20-year tenure in the music industry by having some callbacks right down to the title, being a callback to their sophomore outing. They had a track on there named that, which then they also made a new title track on this, also named that. Also don't know why that happened, but it was a celebration of the group's roots while also acting as a sort of kaleidoscope cliff notes on where they had branched off to. You know, right down to the fact that the RZA, who has been a big component of the creative force of the group in ways that a lot of the group doesn't completely always co-sign, right down to the Wu-Tang show that's on Hulu. The creation of this album had its own high level of creative frustrations. You know, it was released almost 2 years after the 20th anniversary. That's how complicated the creative process of A Better Tomorrow was. You know, Raekwon and the RZA just couldn't get along. And so that leads to my favorite member of the Wu-Tang Clan, Raekwon, getting shelved for a lot of this. He's not on a lot of this project, and it's really upsetting because while there are some highs without him, they would be made even better with his inclusion. You know, I like a lot of where the rest of the group is on this. You know, I think Capadonna and Mastakilla pull their fucking weight on this along with Inspector Deck. I think Method Man has some great verses along with some great choruses. You guys got some great verses on here. You know, I honestly, surprisingly enough, I think the weakest component of this project, outside of some of the production ideas and some of the songs in general that I'll talk about, is the RZA. He is the worst part about this, in my opinion, at least from a verse perspective, which is the complete inverse of what I normally think about the RZA and his verse contribution. But I'll get to my things I don't like in a bit. Let me talk about the things that I do like about A Better Tomorrow. I love a lot of the first stretch, even if a lot of these great songs are missing Raekwon, because they creatively decided to split the album and keep Raekwon on the back half after the song Crushed Egos, which was a great moment, but I mean, Ruckus and B needs Raekwon on it, because everybody goes off on that song. It's a good I'm back bitch opening song that gets the listener amped. You know, it's got this great hook from Method Man of Still Number One. I think Method Man's bridge is good at acting as like sort of an old man master sort of scenario of like showing why this group of older rappers still has it in them. I think You God's great on here. Like, I just think everybody gets in the cut and amps up the listener pretty amicably. You know, I think that it bleeds really well into Felt, which carries that potent energy well. I think that Capadonna's verse on Felt is fantastic. I think the kineticism of the beat is a nice sort of contemporary interpolation with their style pretty well. While, again, I wish Raekwon were on here, I think that the players in the pot on Felt do their job outside of Capadonna. You know, Master Killer, while I wish his verse was a bit longer, he does a good job at interpolating Felt into his own personal meaning. Same with Method Man and Ghostface. You know, while I think that 40th Street Fight is another example of a really good posse cut missing Raekwon, it's still a pretty good continuation of that with the Jizza coming in with a good verse there. Again, I like Method Man. I think that Method Man helps carry a lot of this first run with Capadonna and Mastakilla. Mistaken Identity feels like a good sort of modernization of their sophomore outing with how that sounds. There's a darkness on that track that I think each member taps onto really well with their storytelling and imagery within. Again, Method Man in particular, he just kills his verse on that. So does You God, honestly. Like, this is a really good cut that, again, I wish, imagine Raekwon spitting some imagery on that beat. It would go off. But to pull away from the dreaming of Raekwon on the first half of this album portion of the review, I do think that when he does come in, he enhances the tracks that he's on pretty fucking well. Obviously, I think Crushed Egos was a good bridge to the back half of the album because it does give him his own introduction into the scene. It helps enhance the sort of, like, I don't know, narrative feeling that this album, like, that the meta text of the pacing of this album does. I think that it's great. And while I'll get back on that train in a minute, once Crushed Egos does come in and Raekwon gets to have his own opening moment on the album about halfway through, I think that it does give him a good place to start dropping some really good verses on a still sparsely placed back half of the album with Miracle, which is a track that has its own problems that I'll get to in a moment. But I like Raekwon's verse on that, and I like his verse on Necklace. I think his storytelling on that matches a lot of what that track has going on energy-wise, and I think he sounds great on it. Same with the title track. I think that his verse on the title track might be the best verse on that track, but I am baffled that he is still missing on a lot of this back half where it feels like he would fit so snugly on Preacher's Daughter, following or coming before Ghostface. And how the fuck are you going to have a song called Wu-Tang Reunion and leave the one guy that had the biggest problem with the creative direction of this album off of it? Same with Ron O'Neal and Never Let Go, which is baffling given his verse on the title track that he's not on Never Let Go, given its Martin Luther King sample on throughout the track. Which, to jump to the production on here, I think that the production is pretty fucking solid. I think that it's, you know, got some moments that I don't like, and to pivot into some of the big outliers of things that I don't enjoy, I think that the beat on Miracle is just way out of left field for this group in a way that, like, feels like the hardest pivot. I think that its outro and ruggedness kind of helps bring the album back down to ground level, but I just don't, I think that it's this sort of thing that I thought kept Raekwon away from this project, and yet that's one of the few tracks that he's fucking on. You know, for all of the great beats on here, like again on Preacher's Daughter, that Buffalo Springfield sample is sick as hell. Again, Mistaken Identity feels like some Wu-Tang Forever shit in the best way. I love the shimmery keys on Never Let Go. I think it's dope that while the RZA does still have a lot of his hand on here production-wise, he does let dudes like Fourth Disciple and Adrian Young come in to do production work because of their stuff with the solo outings from the various members of the group, and I like their contributions on here as well. It's just frustrating because I'm of two minds with this project. You know, it has moments that I enjoy. It has components that I think work. It's just wild how sparse this thing feels in pockets of variety of members from the group. You know, one of the things I like even about Wu-Tang Forever, a bloated mess of an album, is that there's this sort of scattershot. Everybody gets a little bit of screen time to do their own thing. You know, I like that component of it, and I feel like if you're making an album that is a celebration of 20 years worth of material and like prominence in the music industry, you would play that up a bit more. You know, yeah, they do keep some of the raw verses from 36 Chambers while juxtaposing that with some serious stuff, like, again, Never Let Go and A Better Tomorrow, which extends the feelings of the original A Better Tomorrow track. And it does a good job at talking about the group in its own sort of celebratory way. I just wish that that felt more like a unified message in a creative sense, and it didn't feel like such a jumbled mess at pockets, you know, especially with, like, Miracle coming out of nowhere. You know, while they do that lush softness in some of those moments that I think hit a little better, I think Miracle is just a moment where that ideology or that, like, construction doesn't do it any favors, in my opinion.
And as far as the general consensus on this album at the time, it was as conflicted as it seemed like the composition of the album itself was. I enjoyed it. I've seen opinions of people who really don't. They hate how frustrating this album can feel like to sit through. I know that people think that it's pretty alright. Some really enjoyed seeing everybody back together again, and I would understand that opinion.
I think that the complications that went on behind the scenes just come up a bit too much on the surface. That makes it a listen that I don't ever normally indulge in full that much. And I think part of the reason why this album is sort of looked back upon not maybe as much is because around the time of A Better Tomorrow's release, you can almost say almost a little too soon after A Better Tomorrow's release, the group was, or at least the RZA, was playing up this other Wu-Tang album that was coming out. But it wasn't just any album. It was an album that nobody collectively was going to be able to hear. It was an album that the group had been working on since, like, the late 2000s and just decided to drop it in this format. You know, it was sold in an auction house, like a lot of art would be, like an art auction. Because that was the thing, the RZA's whole philosophy behind it was to make art, music in particular, like, art in the same way that, like, paintings are. You know, a one of one. Which, like, I get, but, like, music is just not that kind of art, in my opinion. Which I guess opens the conversation of music as art, music as a type of art. And I feel like the big way that a lot of people commodify music in that sense is in the live performance. You know, it is in the moments where you see musical artistry in a once-in-a-lifetime or a version of a once-in-a-lifetime setting. You know, bands have kind of homogenized that in their own ways. You know, like metal bands, they'll do like a drum solo section, and the solos start to kind of bleed together in some instance. But to some degree, they are their own sort of living, breathing thing. And I feel like that is where that is a sweet spot to which commodifying music in that sense is all like understandable. It makes sense, at least, you know, to me. You know, doing this one-of-one album that can only be made public until 2103, which is just a wild number. And it's something that also kind of plagued this release before it was ever really dropped. You know, it was something that was a buzz in the scene more so than A Better Tomorrow, and members of the group did not like this idea. You know, and I can understand their feelings of this. You know, I feel like a decision like doing something like this with an album should be a collective decision, and to drop it under the group's moniker like that, it kind of sucks, you know? And it's unfortunate, you know? It's an album that has been heard outside of the people who own it, but, like, only in small doses, and it's really unfortunate. Initially, the album was unfortunately bought by scum of the earth, Martin Shkreli, and when he got detained, it was seized by the government, which was then redistributed into the world and was bought by, unfortunately, again, some, like, Bitcoin or, like, crypto peeps. You know, talk about something that's, like, commodified in a weird way, but I digress. It sucks that Once Upon a Time in Shaolin is a Wu-Tang album I probably will never hear unless, for some reason, somebody breaks the agreement of that album's, you know, contract or whatever. But I understand why the group did it. It also just kind of feels indicative of the group to let that be the last collective group album that they've dropped or have released into the world, whether it be hearable through personal ears or not. They've done other things. There was an album that dropped in 2017 that I don't think had everybody on it, but that technically is the most recent Wu-Tang Clan titled album. But A Better Tomorrow / Once Upon a Time in Shaolin are the last two pieces of collectively agreed, released as a group outings by the Wu-Tang Clan. One, a solid, if not messy, celebration of the group. The other, again, sort of fitting for the Wu-Tang Clan. What do you think of A Better Tomorrow? Do you listen to it much? Have you listened to it since it's dropped? Let me know in the comments down below. Are you excited for Woo-Brewery, the sequel? Let me know in the comments down below. I'm going to go. Thank you again so very much for watching. I've been Viral Rack. You guys have good days, lives, and situations. And I'll see you another day.
Oh yeah, Jizza was definitely the move. Which makes sense, because the Jizza's solo work is also better than the RZA's in my opinion. Like, obviously Liquid Swords 1 gets a lot of love, because it's like one of the best rap albums of all time, or at least of the 90s. But like Liquid Swords 2 is alright. Pro Tools, whatever.